All right, Barrett. So you're gonna show up in a sec. Marty totally faked me out there. I thought video was showing up. Okay, Barrett. Let's kind of summarize Pursuance for people who missed it yesterday, and so we can nail the most succinct pitch. It's complex. It's enabling some awesome stuff. If we say it's a social network for activists or something, then it sounds like, oh, it's just Facebook. But say, we have this ecosystem of people. You can have these powerful connections between different groups. Highlighting that, we've talked about this sort of, digital resistance kind of stuff. There's different ways to think about Pursuance. So, Barrett, your video is about to show up for people, so just hang on one sec.
Can they hear me now?
I think so. Is his mic a little low? Say something, Barrett.
Something.
Excellent.
Anyway, so that's we'll wait for the video. So Pursuance is a broad framework, and being a broad framework, it's many different things. There's certain things that, this exact apparatus could be used in all sorts of ways. But we're taking this broad framework and emphasizing certain activities, such that this is something that can be used, for instance, to run your local bike drive, to take bike donations. Anything from that up to running the government of a breakaway territory. It's that broad in terms of what you can do with it. Now, specifically, we have certain emphases based on what we've seen to be effective. There are certain things that we're pushing for and trying to get people to do at first with it, so as to kind of create a foundation by which others coming along later can do more with it. And a lot of that will be based on experimentation that they do that we won't be able to envision. So obviously, we're going to be very actively seeking NGOs and nonprofits, helping them use this system, making it easy for them. In fact, one of the pursuances that you and I are going to be overseeing over the long term will be a pursuance specifically given over to helping existing institutions use the Pursuance system. So going back to what it is, it's essentially an environment, an online visualized environment in which participants can create their own entities, apply to join entities, create entities as much as they want. Someone can be a member of a number of entities, a number of pursuances, if they apply and are accepted. It allows for collaboration without forced collaboration, as in you're not being brought into, let's say, a meeting of Occupy where there's 100 people and all it takes is 2 or 3 to disrupt things. You're not being brought into an IRC with anonymous participants, and some of them are feds and some of them are just off the walls. You're able to determine the degree of collaboration, under this proceduralism of agreements. Is there a problem with feedback, or?
No, we can hear you great, and video is now up, so we're fully rolling. Okay, great. That sounds like a reasonable summary. So in terms of concrete features, so that people know from yesterday, right? So, and I can show you as well. All right. So with Pursuance, right, you should be able to start a Pursuance. Increase the font a little bit. So we had 2 examples from yesterday. So people working on prison reform versus like FOIA requests and like doing those sort of as a group. Here's two examples of pursuances. And then within prison reform, right? So the way that people do a lot of kind of task management, project management, collaborative stuff, a little bit of collaboration, and people do productive collaboration online compared to whatever, Facebook and Twitter and Reddit and whatnot. You're typically very limited in how you can break things down. So if you want to have like something that's very ambitious and and split that down into like mini small pieces that are manageable that like individual people can actually do, then having kind of being able to go kind of nest many layers deep and get as specific as you need to. By design, you cannot assign things to multiple people, because what always happens is no individual person feels obligated to do that thing. So if if there's like multiple jobs that multiple people are doing, you break that down into smaller pieces. So with this example, right, it's like if there's something that one of the partner pursuances is specializing in, like in this case we have like the FOIA network is like the other pursuance that is a partner of the prison reform one, then if people want to, that's fine, assign it to this other group, then from there they can break that down and assign that to other people. I think that's powerful because that enables these linkages between the different groups, these different pursuances, as well as limiting the sort of complexity that you have to deal with, right? If you just assign stuff to some other group and they want to break it down further, that is not something that you necessarily have to manage. And if you think of like how the real world works, right? It's like you have, Foxconn is a electronics manufacturer, and they build stuff for Apple, right? Apple says, here's what I want, here's like the output that I desire, and kind of hand it off to that other group. And all the internal complexity in that other entity, in this case another company, that's not something that Apple needs to ever see. They say, here's what I need, the other group figures out the details. So being able to do that within Pursuance is, I think, a powerful thing. And then being able to...
if you would, as long as we're talking about the fundamentals right now, pull up the main Pursuance website real quick, just so we can show them visually what the ecosystem itself looks like. And scroll down to the examples with the little, these are some sort of schematics that show you what, we've just looked at the task management thing, which is a very important part of this. This is the other important part. This is the ecosystem that you see. And this is obviously something I did in MS Paint about a month after getting out of prison, so it doesn't quite capture the beauty that we expect to implement in the visualization here. But it creates an environment in which, first of all, you have unusually robust ability to customize entities and to experiment with entities and to take what you've built, sort of structures that achieve certain goals, and then resubmit them, make them available to others so that everybody is coming in and seeing the best practices established and can kind of take those again and tweak them further so that it evolves in that way. So overall, you have this large space with all of these structures that you can see to a certain extent. Now, some pursuances, one of the fundamental defaults, one of the fundamental options that one has to decide when they create a pursuance or later on is whether to make it visually available to others or whether to make it opaque. As in pursuances generally, the majority of pursuances, you'll be able to look at them and see this is what this pursuance does. This structure is this is what this person's role is, and you can look at it and you can get a sense of what they're doing and, thereby able to figure out, should we reach out to this pursuance as well, since we're doing something that's or whatever, and start trading information, develop an agreement of some sort. So all of that helps to, I think, amplify. It makes it a lot easier for people to come in and see what's going on and see what needs to be done. And that's also reinforced by all the other tools we have that allow pursuances or individuals within pursuances to say, this is what, we need help with this, we're doing this project, blah, blah, blah. There's a number of other tools for that. But on the whole, what you're existing in, as in this parallel civic ecosystem, is this visualized space in which all this stuff is happening. And then you get down to the task management tool that Steve has developed over the last year or so, which on top of that vastly enhances their ability once you have a pursuance, even aside from the structural abilities whereby you have a certain structure, people connected in certain ways, and that's how information and tasks flow. You also have this, within a pursuance, this task manager that we think is an improvement on what exists right now. You put it all together, and you put that in the hands of the people we're putting into this, the thousands of people, of a certain shared commitment to the open society. You give them these tools, and you give them enough options where they can evolve it themselves. They can think up pursuances not just techniques, but ways of organizing techniques that we can't conceive of, but that they'll on the ground evolve over time, you have something that's going to vastly to grow perpetually while still maintaining the agility that we've seen to be effective in the last few years. Sorry, go back to you, Steve.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's great. So yeah, so as we saw in these diagrams, right? So Barrett was trying to think of a way. Okay, you have these linkages between groups that could, in the future that will probably mean more things over time. Right now, it simply means that you can assign tasks to other groups, to other pursuances, and I was trying to think of a way to kind of enable this kind of daisy chaining that Barrett put in this second part of this diagram, and I realized that and I was also trying to simultaneously solve some of the kind of trust problems that people have talked about. They're like, I want to, if I want to kind of see if someone is good and let them into the group, but then it turns out I can't trust them, then I just kind of invited an infiltrator. So like, how do we solve that? So I realized that we can kind of solve all 2 or 3 of those things at once if you can invite someone to a pursuance in such a way that they have very limited privileges, and specifically if they can only see the tasks that they've been assigned, then you can imagine having this kind of sequence of different tasks. You invite some people in, each of them is working on a different one, and maybe they realize this or not. I guess in this case they wouldn't. Different work from different people would be kind of collected. So there'd be a sort of collaboration between people without them having to kind of know that like the output of one person's work becomes the input for someone else's. So anyway, I'll talk more in a few minutes about the permissions model and what else that enables. So go ahead, Barrett.
On that same note, and this kind of relates to this, a lot of what we're sort of the problems we're setting out to solve with this are the problems that you can kind of imagine, even if you've never been involved in an organization or a broad movement or any number of collective entities. You can kind of see, you can imagine problems that come up when you have people organized in certain ways. And beyond that, if you have actually been involved in a company or a think tank or a bunch of people on the street who were protesting and so on, you're aware of the dynamics that come up that make it difficult to get these things done. And so what we're doing here on the whole with these structures and with these systems is allowing individuals to better define the terms of their collaboration, to make people available to each other without forcing them upon each other. And so within that, so this basic structure that you've seen in the diagrams, you can kind of envision that does that by you create a pursuance, you get to decide how it grows, what is structured, who joins, and you can delegate that power to whatever extent. You could also create an entirely democratic pursuance where you create it and immediately say anyone who wants to join now has equal ability to control this, and you can do any number of these things based on what your personality is, what your vision is for collaboration, and based on what specific tasks you're doing. And within that, you have all these options and tools that further allow you to refine that. So no one coming into this will really have, as opposed to any other group, no one really is going to come into this and have a legitimate grievance about not being able to do something. Anyone can create their own pursuance, and anyone can decide to apply or not to apply to any pursuance they want to, take the same thing they're doing if they'd like and create their own pursuance and do it differently on a more democratic or less democratic or anarchist associational structure. That itself cuts down on a lot of the problems we see with sort of infighting that occurs over philosophical and procedural grounds, particularly with things like Anonymous, where there's no constitution, there's no charter, there's no one really that can say, hey, we do this is what we are. It's all kind of amorphous. That same thing applies to even somewhat more solid movements of today, and it certainly applies to institutions. Anyway, so this is all an exercise in anticipating those problems, using our experience with different associational structures to further anticipate them, and then ensuring that people have the tools to deal with whatever else arises, whatever they've experienced. So every pursuance is a highly customizable entity on those grounds, and that's what's going to allow this to appeal to a broad swath of citizen actors across the world.
Mm-hmm. I really like what you said, particularly about we want to enable people to kind of collaborate with each other without forcing them. So I've tried to kind of build that philosophy into how federation will work. So if you have different servers, so like a particular pursuance will just live on one server, but you should be able to optionally peer with other pursuance servers, and so you can have people who are in various places, who are on different servers but can still collaborate with each other as if they're on the same server. So that way there's no kind of single point of failure in the network to take down every pursuance. And this is done in like a few different ways, right? There's things like Tor, where it's like, it's an open network, and when it comes to like using it for web browsing, which is largely the use case, that makes a lot of sense. But like Barrett's talking about, it's like, if you have your server and there's people that you don't want to collaborate with, you don't want to associate with on some other server, like the system's not going to force you to like connect to them or forward their traffic or have them use their resources. So on the technical side, I really like how CJDNS and IPFS are doing some things, so that the peering is sort of inspired by some of that thinking, as well as like kind of like, you should have this kind of mesh of servers, but your client should just talk to one server. Like, there's a lot of hype and excitement around doing things in an extremely decentralized way, and it is harder to shut down something that's extremely decentralized. People don't realize, though, that if things are ultra decentralized, including the client that you're using to like connect to these networks, then if you're in a chat room, the example I like to use is, if you're in a chat room with like 50 other people and you want to upload a picture, then you have to upload it 50 different times if it's like your device talking to someone else's. So Pursuance is not doing that, right? You're server to server communication, bandwidth wise, it's very fast, it's very low latency, it's ultra cheap. It'll be like a few cents a gig. Mobile data is like $10 a gig. It's like orders of magnitude less efficient to try to make things ultra decentralized. And then it's hard to have a single source of truth as well. If you sent me a message and it didn't come through, like, how am I supposed to know that? But if there's like a single source of truth and each pursuance lives in one spot, but we'll have replicated backups and whatnot. So if like a server gets taken down, we can spin a new one up, or something happens. But anyway, I feel like people are generally not like, philosophically, it is really cool to not have like a centralized thing, but I feel like people are just literally not doing the math. Okay, Barrett, so a few more questions here, and then, or just a couple more, and then I'll do more technical stuff, I suppose. One of them was, what do we see as some of the, like, what are the next immediate steps for Pursuance, and then what would you consider to be like major victories? Like, what are some major signs of a success, like particular ways in which we would like to change the world?
Sorry, repeat the first part of that question again.
The first part was something I just forgot. Immediate next steps for Pursuance.
Immediate next steps. Well, right now we're doing a couple different things. We've actually gotten a lot of the hard parts done over the last year. Right now, obviously, you and your team are finishing up the actual programming. In the meantime, we're continuing to bring on more people to apply to participate in the system. We've had about 1,200 people sign up as of today. We expect to have vastly more over the next 6 months, as some of these more media interviews I've done about this come out on NPR, a little bit on PBS. Obviously, the book that I'm doing, about a fourth of it is about the system. When that comes out, that'll get us another large, different kind of audience of people, potential participants. And so that's all stuff that we're constantly working on. We've established our nonprofit. We've established a mechanism for donations. We're applying for grants for the long term from a number of foundations, and we've applied twice so far, and we'll be doing that perpetually. So a lot of it is really just, from my standpoint, aside from the technical stuff, the actual hard work every day that you and other people do. My role and the role of a lot of the rest of us is directly going to groups and individuals and saying, hey, we want you involved in this. We want you early on. We want to populate this as well as possible at the get-go, so that the kind of people that come, so that we establish a certain character of the population to supplement all of these structures and systems. And that's very important, obviously, because if we can get And this leads to the second question about successes. If we have the right people in here, and we already kind of do have some of them, but if we have several thousand very robust people, very erudite, honest people working for the Open Society, doing different tasks, different goals, perhaps unrelated in many cases. If we have them start now building these pursuances, building connections among pursuances, we start taking the steps towards the ultimate purpose of this, which is to establish a single entity made up of independent parts with different arrays, different degrees of relationships between them, that's capable of confronting criminalized institutions across the world in a way that'll be vastly more robust than what we've seen in the past 10 years. And we've seen some pretty impressive things in the past 10 years. But we're very early on in the information age. We have just started to scratch the surface of what it means to be able to collaborate in this sense. And there's been we've seen some very profound changes because of the emphasis that's been put on helping people waste time together better, like Facebook. But we've also seen Facebook used, on an ad hoc basis by revolutionaries successfully in Tunisia and elsewhere. And so all these things gathered together, I think we can expect to see some pretty extraordinary victories and achievements in the next year using this system. And that's going to help bring on even more and more, participants, especially since things are deteriorating, especially since the overworld, the supposed serious institutions, the states and the corporations have profoundly discredited themselves in a way that I couldn't have envisioned 10 years ago. And that obviously makes it easier for us to make our case that it's time to try something else.
Absolutely. I mean, the idea that I think there's basically like a neo-Nazi-ish party that just got 9% of the vote in Germany. Like that is insane. So yeah, absolutely. There's more problems than ever it seems, and people are looking for solutions. So excellent.
Oh, sorry, let me just add one thing. Make
sure
we clarify this. Is that this is intended to be several things. It's not intended to be. We're not saying, hey, stop participating in politics, stop participating with NGOs. We're not saying that at all. We're actually trying to supplement that process. And now, but this is something that can appeal to people who have given up on politics, like I have. I mean, I can't vote. I'm a felon. But we're trying to reach everyone with this broad philosophical basis, regardless of what their particular philosophy is on how do you bring about change. Are you a gradualist? Are you a balls out anarchist black bloc guy? It doesn't matter. You know that change is necessary. You don't have to give up your long-term intent to work on this system. Even if you're a very radical, sort of out of the mainstream group that's working on environmentalism or some such, you can use this system to work with more mainstream groups that kind of want the same thing as you do, with some differences, without giving up that independence. And that's an important part of this, because we don't want to alienate or bar people who are still out there doing the important work within the system that needs to be done. And that's important, because to the extent that we can get those people to work together to some extent, with whatever they're comfortable with, or at least make that more easier and more sort of palatable, that's going to cause some pretty severe advances in its own right.
Awesome. All right, thank you, Barrett. Okay, I think I'll I guess just to pick up on what something you just said, and just to add to something I mentioned yesterday. So we talked about a few early pursuances that we expect to be some of the earliest ones. I mean, anti-spy bill that Internet Party of New Zealand is trying to pass. That would be a big deal if there was this precedent in the Western world for actually, like protecting the right to privacy. We already have the Fourth Amendment. In the U.S. we already have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It supposedly protects privacy. Apparently, that is not enough, and we need more more stuff in writing that actually defends us in that way. So, okay, Barrett, I'm gonna go to slides and talk about some technical stuff, and feel free to jump in when you'd like to comment on whatever.
Very well.
And I'm gonna share my screen with you, Barrett, and then here we go. Cool. All right. So we just saw this a minute ago. I guess I can jump to this. Is it on? I may need to restart a daemon or something. Anyway, so between end-to-end encrypted task management, that, like I said, you can assign tasks to other groups. That's important. And then we will be adding a feature so you can add tasks to people based on skill set. So it's like, here's this thing I need done. Here's this thing I need done. Here's the skills required to do it. Dear Pursuance system, find the best person to do the job. Action broadcasts, I also, we covered yesterday a little bit. So there's certain things that instead of just having one person do them once, the ability to say, hey, everyone, retweet this. Hey, everyone, post this on Facebook. Everyone, sign this petition, something like that. And then gamification, so that things are more compelling, and combining that with sort of reputation, so people have karma points that can help make the system more efficient over time. Because instead of us just seeing, okay, here's 5 people that have the right skill set to do a certain thing, and it's not clear who should do it. If people have a track record of getting stuff done on the system, then we can leverage that. Real-time chat, file sharing. By default, every Pursuance will be accessible as a Tor hidden service. Did I say that right? Yeah, every Pursuance available as a Tor hidden service. And then, and then all the things that Barrett was talking about in terms of having this ecosystem of people. That's very important. So I want to add more and more kind of semi-automation stuff over time. So the ability to say something like, reassign this task to an appropriate person every 3 days until it gets done. I notice in watching some online activists operate that there's way too much manual work done by that could be automated that no other system does. All this work is being done by people who are kind of coordinating stuff. So, okay, so tech-wise, there's a ton of React code. So right now it's like 90% React and other JavaScript code, and using Redux for that. One reason why I chose React is because there's something called React Native, and that allows us to sort of package. Uh-oh. All right. Anyway, so React Native allows you to kind of reuse 80 or 90% of your kind of normal JavaScript code and React code, and you just kind of redo the UI layer. So and then you bundle that, and you have native applications. So like an iPhone app or an Android app, right? So you would use like the interface builders, I think is how people do it, for iOS, for Android. And then all of your business logic that it controls, like what happens when you press a certain button, like all of that JavaScript runs in a separate thread. It's a background thread that doesn't freeze the UI. So React Native has that advantage. And then there's another technology that GitHub created, GitHub the company, that is called Electron. And you basically, so Electron allows you to basically ship a browser tab. You literally ship a browser. It's like Chromium that you ship bundled with your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then this is a way to have cross-platform desktop applications. So people would have a native app, but we get to use, that they install locally. You're not trusting, JavaScript on every page load, although I'll talk significantly more about that later. But initially, so we can iterate very quickly and, kind of show the UI to users and get that right. Before we do like a broader launch, being able to iterate web-wise is great for that purpose. And we'll talk more about that later. So back-end tech-wise, Go. Go's an awesome programming language. It came out of Google. Having it so that we can do a lot of concurrent things very easily without callback hell or hacks around it, like promises kind of work. And there's being able to use all CPU cores efficiently is important. Having static typing is really valuable, so you don't have to write a million tests just to make sure that you didn't misspell a method and basic stuff like that. So I'm a huge fan of Go. Postgres, database-wise. And then there's something that is really, really, really amazing. So any programmers here? Raise your hand if you've written some code. Raise your hand if you're tired. Raise your hand if you've written web applications in particular. All right, that's basically most of the developers for sure, and most of the people here. So, Are you guys tired of writing CRUD logic all day and just doing the same like bullshit over and over again? I'm gonna get the user object from the database and like serialize it to JSON. Like, why do we write that like every single app? I think it's totally ridiculous, and I literally couldn't take it anymore. So with one of my projects, like a Django thing, I wrote these like super high level functions that return functions that you can use to like do the CRUD logic for you. But what we're using for Pursuance is this piece of technology called PostgREST. PostgREST with a T at the end. So what it does is you just tell, it's like it's written by crazy Haskell people, very cool people, very smart people. You have this one binary that is PostgREST. You have this short config file and you tell it how to connect to your Postgres database. And then you use kind of normal like database permission stuff, like making it so certain users or certain roles, like certain kind of groups of users, have access to do certain database operations. So there's the simple ones that people are familiar with, where it's like a certain user or a certain role has like access to a certain table, or can like create stuff in a table or view a whole table. But it's not very fine-grained. So what Postgres, the database, made a few years ago is called row-level security. So you can make it where it's like you can only modify the rows in the messages table where you are the sender. So you can have things that are very fine-grained that way, and these declarations are very small. It's like assign create on blank to this user, but like if there's conditional logic, like constraints you put on things. So anyway, Postgres uses those things, and then it exposes. And it uses JSON Web Tokens for authentication. And it exposes this database that you've told it how to connect to, that is using these security mechanisms. You expose it as a RESTful API. So we have, so like on the back end, I did basic Postgres database schema. We have a pursuances table and a users table and a memberships table that like keeps track of which users are members of which pursuances. And there's tasks and a couple other ones, and so we have our React code directly talking to Postgres. You do a JSON post to /tasks, and you just fill in the fields, and then it makes a task for you. So like we just had to specify the structure of the data on the back end, but there are like 0 lines of code, of custom code we had to write just to shuffle like the data back and forth. Like it's pretty amazing. Let me show you a couple examples of that, actually. Auth, I think it's here. It will do some pretty mind-blowing things, like automatically discover kind of certain like foreign key relationships between different tables. So you can do things like, Postgres. There's example queries, and like it uses its own little kind of query language, and you put stuff in the URL parameters. So like here, so if you want to grab every row from the people table with an age less than 13, then like you do this GET request to Postgres, and it does all of that for you, and it returns JSON, and you didn't have to write any manual code to do that. I think it's genius. Like there's a couple examples on here that are mind-blowing. So like suppose you have this like actually, so here's like a fairly complex, not super complex, but non-trivial database schemas, right? So you have actors, you have films that those actors are in. That relationship is called a role. You have different directors of films. You have nominations of films, and then there's like competitions, I guess. And then you say, okay, I want to get all the films, but I just want the title, right? So like this really this empowers the client to a very meaningful degree, and that's how I think more stuff should work, right? It's like one reason why people are so skeptical of kind of people who are really into decentralized stuff. The reason why they're so skeptical of like server client relationship stuff, it's like because it's like you just the client doesn't have enough power. But anyway, from here, like without like on the client, it's pretty common where it's like you need kind of certain data from one part of the website, and then you need like a subset of that data for another, and you just like manually, like copy and paste and tweak some, handler function on the back end. And here you just, the client can efficiently request exactly what it wants, exactly what it needs, without inefficiencies. So just one more example for Postgres. So here, you're grabbing all films, and then you're like reaching through, you're like sort of transparently reaching through the roles table to grab certain actors, and then you're ordering those actors. So we didn't have to write any custom code again to do that. We just like connected the tables in the right way, and then it just like will let you fetch that data. So anyway, we shouldn't have to write custom code just to like do basic RESTful stuff, and Postgres makes that possible. So okay, that was front end and back end, and then HTTPS only, talking to the server, and then okay, so the real-time chat part of Pursuance is called Leap Chat. AJ and I started Leap Chat like a couple weeks before I met Barrett, and then it made a ton of sense just to kind of have the timeline and like have like the roadmap of a Leap Chat determined by Pursuance. So right now, anyone in the world can go to leapchat.org, and it'll throw you immediately into an end-to-end encrypted chat room. So like I got tired of people trying to have sensitive conversations with me in like Slack or Mattermost, and yes, it's true that you're trusting the server not to be malicious. In this case, the thing that blows my mind is like in the worst possible case scenario, and like everything absolutely goes wrong here, then like the server can see your messages. In the normal case with Slack and Mattermost, if nothing goes wrong, like then they can see everything. So, I think this is a meaningful improvement when people are either skeptical about downloading a certain app. People know that if you download something and you install on your computer, it can kind of do whatever it wants to you. So if you don't want to deal with that from a threat model perspective, and you don't want to have sensitive conversations in Slack and hand your messages over automatically to some random company, and then after you go to 10,000 messages, you can't see your own messages, but they can see them, which is the worst possible scenario. It's not useful to you. So anyway, that's part of Leap Chat. So I mentioned the WebSockets here. So we want Pursuance to be very real time. So if you're looking at this like sort of task hierarchy, and someone creates a new task, or you're mentioned, or there's a message somewhere that is relevant to you, then having it automatically flow through to your browser is one thing we're working on. So the way that will work is like once people like post something to through a Postgres and create that in the database, database trigger can sort of tell our Go code, hey, there was a new insert on this table, and then Go grabs that insert and then kind of inspects its WebSocket connections and is keeping track of which user is on like the other end of which WebSocket, and then it will like send that new information to the relevant users who should see them. So in talking to activists that have done more kind of advanced kinds of operations online, they made it clear that that just having kind of, either you're a normal user and you can see everything that is going on, or you're an admin and you have kind of extra privileges, that is not enough for them. So multiple people mentioned like, okay, I want to kind of see if someone's any good, but I don't want to just hand everything over to them and have them see everything that is going on in my group. I don't know if I can trust them yet. So there's six different kind of tiers of users. So either, we have this online. We have a wiki page for this. All our code is at github.com/Pursuance Project, by the way. If we go here and then to the wiki, we look at permissions, This is a complicated table, but this is sort of the rules. So, if someone isn't trusted very much, then they can view, discuss, and they can like basically collaborate with you over and just see the task that they have been assigned. And then there's more of a normal user that can see what's going on in the pursuance, and they can do tasks that they've been assigned and suggest subtasks. So that's another kind of in between thing that people said that they wanted. It's like instead of giving some kind of full permission to do something, you don't know if you can trust them with it, versus not enabling to do that thing in the first place. Like you don't know like where they stand. So making it so they can suggest ideas, suggest sort of tasks and subtasks, and then if over time it seems like they have good ideas, then you can kind of make it so they can make tasks by default. And assigner is very similar, but being able to run around and like assign tasks to people and kind of pair people up with appropriate work. Being able to recruit means you can invite people to the pursuance. So notice that like less privileged users cannot do that by default. That's something that Barrett and other people mentioned as being a problem, where it's like, oh yeah, we're all in this together. Let's have this giant swarm just like heading in the same direction, and it'll be great. And then it's like, if there's people who are being disruptive, and you can't kick them out, then that's a problem. But as Barrett mentioned earlier, anyone can create their own pursuance. So it's harder to say like, hey, I'm being kind of prevented from doing anything, and you can recruit other people on that server, or invite people to your pursuance and recruit that way. And then some interesting conversations with people of like someone who's like a normal admin wants to be able to kind of delegate stuff to people with like almost the same privileges, but being able to like permanently delete something, which we're calling nuking. If you to nuke a task, you need to be able to be like super high level. We don't want people to be able to get a little bit too much power and then just like delete everything once they get in the pursuance or something like that. And definitely the role that people are most entertained by, God. If you're a god of a pursuance, you can do whatever the fuck you want. That's what that means. So that's the 6 different levels of permissions, and using cryptography to kind of make it so that if you just kind of get like in the original design, there's kind of one like when you got invited to a pursuance at any permissions level, you would there'd be just one key that like you would get. Now users don't have to think in terms of keys, as I will mention in a couple slides. Like we're generating people's key pairs just from their credentials, so people will need like a longer than usual password or passphrase. But there's this technique called key stretching that makes it so that like you don't have to have like a gigantic passphrase. I'll talk about that more later, but so people get a key pair that way, right? So from their perspective, it's like you're signing in, right? You're just signing into a service, no big deal, and that makes it so those people can individually be given information can be encrypted in such a way that only they can decrypt it, right? Their public key is used to encrypt things to them. So the idea is like someone signs up on a server, they have an account, and then if you want to invite them, from the user interface perspective, it's like you specify the username of the person you want to invite. But what's going on behind the scenes is like, and critically, when you invite them, you specify what permissions level they should have among the 6 that we just looked at. And so depending upon the permissions level, that will determine which cryptographic key that they get. And that in turn helps determine like what things they can decrypt and what they can see within the system. So in the original design, and I brainstormed with some people and thought of something that's better. Originally, there's just one kind of pursuance-wide key, but then the problem there is like even if someone's like not very trusted and you're using like the database to ensure that they can only see stuff that they've been assigned, then it's like someone kind of barely sneaks in and then either hacks into the server or gets the data somehow, pays the the person controlling the server to clone the hard drive silently and stuff. And it's like if there's just one key that you can use to kind of unravel everything in the pursuance, that would be bad. So now the design is that there's 3 different keys. There's kind of 3 different top-level keys. So if there's one key that encrypts things that are assigned to people at sort of the lowest level, and that way, I have a couple slides on this. So that way that way they would only be able to decrypt, even if they got the database data somehow, they'd only be able to decrypt stuff that's like that very low privileged people can see. In making these slides, actually, I realized it may make a bit more sense. I mean, how many hundreds of keys do we want on the system? Well, you will see. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But it might be too complicated, but you could make it so that each particular person at this lowest ranking, there's kind of like a key that is specific to them, and then things assigned to them are encrypted with their own key. So then even if they somehow got access to all the data in the database and they had that one key, they wouldn't be able to see any additional information. That would be pretty great. So that may make more sense than having this whole tier of people where there's a sort of a shared key, right? Because I mean, you could for whatever reason, depending upon how you met somebody or whatever, you could make it so it could be the case that you invite one person and you want that specific person to only see certain information, and you don't want them to see other stuff that other untrusted people can see. Anyway. So it's probably a bit better just to have a few more keys and make it so that a task is encrypted with the key of just that specific assignee. So from the user's perspective, they're just changing the assignee. Okay, that person didn't work out. I'm going to assign this to a different one. The amount of information that makes up a task is tiny. So just kind of re-encrypting that for a different key shouldn't be a big deal. In some cases, it'll be you create a task and then you upload a bunch of files that are connected to it, and then so those things are sharing a key. So that makes you think that it is better to do the original thing mentioned, where it's there's these tasks that people at the lowest level will do. There is more key sharing going on, but then there'll be less re-encrypting. But any questions or ideas related to the permissions model? Miko? I don't know if there's a mic, but I've debated that with people. I'm like, how does that supposed to work? So I mean, Barrett's answer was, and sorry, I should repeat it for people watching on the web. So can a god create another god that can then delete the original? I thought about the different systems that do they allow you to do that? I think they generally do. Barrett's answer was if you created the pursuance, then the partial solution is if you look at these permissions, there's almost nothing that the god can do that the admin can't. Nuking the pursuance is the one and only thing. So the solution is you make someone else an admin. You don't create multiple gods, and you don't have that philosophical conundrum of if someone's all powerful, can they destroy some other all powerful person? That is a hard one, and so we try to sidestep that by making it so there's just one god, we're monotheistic around here, right? No, just kidding.
Absolutely.
Zero. What is the fancy term for zero? Zero theistic? I don't know, Barrett.
I don't know, but we don't. When you have multiple gods, you look at their mythology, and it's always very messy. So it's something to be avoided. However, in all seriousness, in this instance, the reason we would presumably allow a god to create another god simply because we want to forestall arguments that I can't do something with this I want to do. I can't make this totally democratic. I still have more power than anybody else. So people can do that if they want to make it so their pursuits can be deleted by any person that they have to give power to. We don't advise it, but it's something that we would consider allowing simply because someone somewhere is going to make an argument that, oh, look, this is authoritarian. This is a and those are arguments that often unfairly get made about all kinds of things. And we just want to forestall those arguments. But again, I think the defaults, presumably, would be such that that would not happen.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. If we just encourage people like, hey,
we're getting into the theology of activism really here. So
right.
It's an interesting subject, but not necessarily hugely important.
Right. Okay. So that's a permissions model. So different tiers. A major question we get that we should cover that the people have asked a lot, and this ties perfectly into the permissions model, is kind of what about infiltrators? You know, you have people who seem pretty good at first and they kind of bury their way in. How do you kind of limit the damage there? I mean, part of that is not a technological problem, right? It's like there's somebody who asked the question like a fairly extreme version, and my response to them was, what you basically just said to me is like, I made this awesome security system for my house, and then I gave my neighbor the key and like the code to get in, and like the system didn't do anything to stop them. I'm like, you know, there's a point at which it's a trust issue, and you just, you know, if you let someone do certain things and then it turned out that you shouldn't have trusted them, then, you know, part of that is not a technology thing, but we can mitigate that with technology. So making it.
I'll jump in on this one because I've had a great deal of experience with infiltrators of different sorts over the years, and it's something that, again, as you said, it's something we can try to mitigate. The responsibility is still on the activist, on the citizen, to make sure that he's not, you know, bringing in somebody who, without, you know, is unduly capable of monitoring and or affecting things for adverse actors. And that's something that we don't pretend to nor aspire to get rid of altogether. It's something that will always be in the nature of opposition to powerful actors. And it's something that will be vastly less of a problem with this, simply because if you look at the other models, Facebook groups, IRC networks, people coming in, there's hundreds of people sitting around, that makes it extraordinarily easy for the infiltrators. It's made it extremely easy for companies like HB Gary to monitor things, in-game systems, the FBI, Russian intelligence, everybody who was either trying to monitor or disrupt or take control of aspects of Anonymous or the group in history. You know, with the FBI's COINTELPRO against U.S. activists, that was often very successful. On the other side of the coin, the drama and paranoia that comes with that is just as dangerous in many cases, historically, than the actual infiltration. That was something that was consciously pursued by the FBI, who recognized that they can disrupt an organization simply by the idea of infiltrators being there. So it's something where we ask you to keep calm and carry on. You know, and that's something that it's one of those things that we have diminished by virtue of these structures. It's something that it makes it harder for them. But, you know, it's also something beyond the encryption and beyond, you know, best practices that we, you know, encourage when you're building a pursuance and deciding who gets to have access to what. It's something that you can mitigate to different degrees within your individual pursuance based on what you're doing. Obviously, some pursuances are going to receive very little attention from adverse actors. Some are going to be, you know, you're going to have the NSA writing reports on you, or in-game systems writing reports on you, like they did on Anonymous. Something that international powers will be very interested in. So we provide a number of opportunities within the options settings and the way you structure it to determine, you know, what the best way forward is for you based on your risk factor.
Right. Okay, Barrett, you're breaking up a little bit. I just realized we're on Wi-Fi instead of wired. I'm just going to refresh this window, and then it should be a better connection. Hang on just a second.
Very well.
Great. All right, Barrett should join just a sec. Okay, great. In case it was Wi-Fi, that should fix it. Okay, so Barrett, just to pick up on something you just mentioned, and more about the kind of permissions and infiltrator sort of thing. So one thing that I thought was appealing about the ability to assign tasks to other pursuances, it's not just this kind of outsourcing thing, you know, that was mentioned earlier, where yes, you don't have to deal with that complexity, someone else takes care of it, but also being able to, you know, if you want to, like, break things up into not just different tiers within a pursuance, but completely independent pursuances. So if somebody infiltrates one of them, you know, that there's a partnership between that pursuance and some other one, then only these sort of shared tasks, and there may just be a very small number of them, would be visible between both groups. So the one would not be able to see like everything going on in the other one, even if they're like a god or an admin or whatever of the one Pursuance. So that helps.
If you would pull up the Pursuance Project website real quick and go back to those diagrams, I just want to make one more point that relates to this in terms of infiltration, and also it relates to sort of the larger filtering process that we have with large pursuances.
Sure. This page?
Yeah, right there. So look at this number 4 on the very right here. Look at this. Just envision a much larger pursuance where you have big webs of people coming down off of someone near the core position, near the pursuance. One of the great things about pursuance that solves several problems at once is that it can act as a filter. Under default settings, let's say you create a pursuance, you have people under you, and you give them carte blanche to both recruits and to allow recruiting by those you recruit perpetually. So at the end, you have 1,000 people in a giant web extending off of that. If you're using it, say, for information gathering purposes, contrary to most situations like that, where you're putting out a Twitter post, for instance, saying, I need information on this, or you're in an IRC or whatever, the things we've done in the past, it doesn't necessarily matter to you. It doesn't cause any trouble to you, even if there are maybe 20% of the people brought on are not really capable of doing these things. If they're sending nonsense up the line, that nonsense, the data that's not necessarily useful, it's a waste of your time or is inaccurate or whatever, that's having to be processed upward. It's having to be pushed upward by the next person up that line. So that's important to journalists, for instance, who are perhaps interested in the idea of crowdsourced journalism, but don't want to necessarily expose themselves to relationships with people that are going to either waste their time or something worse. So same thing happens. The same thing applies to infiltration. Someone down the line gets brought on. Most pursuances, the way we generally advise to be structured, are such that that person who's infiltrated, who's gotten to be brought on at some point away from the core of the pursuance, he's going to have to put in a lot of actual work to get to a position where he's going to be able to affect things or know things. Now, that's not true for all pursuances. A lot of pursuances are very intrinsically transparent, whereby everybody knows what's going on. Pursuances that can afford to do that. But anything involving risk, anything involving it's going to attract hostile attention from criminalized state or corporate actors, they have a lot of options that's not only going to save time and sort of prevents it's going to assist with the signal to noise ratio. It's also going to make you, again, somewhat more immune from that hostile attention. And so it's both coming from the same mechanism, the filtration system that arises here. Now, at the same time, one of the examples and features I mentioned last night, and I hasten to point this out because the obvious next question a lot of people will have is, as these structures grow, and if an average pursuance is regimented in that sense, where information is having to get approved by everyone up before it gets there, how do you alleviate the problem of institutions, whereby you have people with good ideas whose ideas are not being recognized by those in the middle? And one of the answers to that this is one of the things I'm really happier about in terms of solving this problem, is that the default settings of a pursuance are such that anyone who joins a pursuance has the right to send a single message to anyone else in that pursuance, including the head of it, one of the people near the core, whatever. So if they have an idea that's not getting properly considered by those who brought him on, or et cetera, that gives them a chance to make his appeal straight to whoever and send that message along with information or idea or reporting a problem elsewhere in the pursuance. And if that person who receives it finds it worthwhile, he can renew that ability of that person and eventually reposition him in the system if you'd like to. Now, beyond that, there's another problem that arises with large network structures that are passing forth information network, and that's the old brontosaurus example that we used to see in children's museums, where you had they explained that a brontosaurus was so large that its neurons, it couldn't receive information to its brain. If you bit its tail, he wouldn't know about it. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think it's been debunked since then. But that does happen in these large networks. So another feature we have that I think will be a default is that pursuances that are in the business of sending around information, doing crowdsourced research, when you pass up when you push up a submission of information to one or more people who are connected to you, there's a percentage chance that that same post will reappear randomly elsewhere in the system. What that does is, without overwhelming people, it provides an opportunity for something to get more than one hearing. As it wouldn't be, and again, that can be changed. The parameters of that, I think the default will be that every post of informational nature does appear elsewhere. Just the randomness is where it appears.
Oh yeah.
You can tweak that, and so depending on what you're doing, you can tweak this so that things are appearing in 30% of the pursuance, and that makes it able to get up to where it needs to go quicker if necessary. It also makes sure that it ensures that people are increasingly on the same page, that information that's regarded to be useful is getting a hearing very broadly. And if it doesn't get pushed on at that random point, so be it. If it does, then it has a higher opportunity of not only getting where it needs to go and getting acted upon, but also keeping people abreast of what's being done elsewhere. And again, these are all very modifiable. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all situation. But so those are the kind of things we have in addition to all this that do help to mitigate all these other things that we see in institutions and in movements.
For sure, yes. So one thing I was brainstorming about a couple of months ago was like I was picturing it's like you're saying, okay, so people are kind of at the bottom of the kind of invite graph hierarchy thing, and like you said, if they're trying to send ideas up the line, once we have those kind of structures in place, you're talking about, okay, they should be able to send a message to people more toward the top, and if it's a good idea, then they can be heard again. One thing that I was brainstorming about a couple months ago, I was picturing this sort of like almost Reddit-like interface where people are kind of upvoting ideas and proposals, but instead of it being the way Reddit works right now, right, where you have like everyone in a subreddit sees exactly the same content, I was thinking it'd be cool if it's like, depending upon kind of where you are in the hierarchy, it's your job to either like upvote or downvote and discuss certain ideas that people propose within the pursuance. And depending upon where you are, you will actually see different ideas, where it's like, if you're in the middle, then like ideas have to like bubble up to you, in order for you to see them. And then and then that runs into the naive version of that runs into the issue that you just mentioned, Barrett, where what if people in the middle don't want to pass the ideas up, there's like good ideas being blocked, then I can imagine a system where it's like if a certain percentage of people within a certain kind of tier like really, really want to force something through, they can kind of leapfrog people who are trying to block them, or if there's people who are new to the sort of invite graph, new to the pursuance, but they have very high, karma, or they've been very helpful, or something like that, then we could have. It seems like we could have mechanisms like that to alleviate.
And that could be figured into the percentage chance of it appearing elsewhere. For instance, someone who has had successes with that in the future might have more opportunities to do that, etc. So there's all these things that are all, it's in some contexts can be very useful, in other contexts perhaps neutral or even deleterious. So that's why we have so many options beyond the defaults that can be tweaked as needed, and that's one of the mechanisms of evolution within the system, because over time people develop these complex structures out of these basic tools, and they will solve certain problems in terms of organization, whether it be here's something to be done, here's a task, a goal, a way of achieving these things, or here's how we structure those things. And they constantly submit these things to the central data library, so that everyone who comes on to the pursuance system, even if they're not interested in building pursuance structures, has access to the very latest developments in how these things work. You can go and look, and you'll see the data library and say, I want to work on agriculture reform, and I'll search around in there, and I'll come up with structures that people have submitted with notations, and it'll be a sort of a complex deal with these relationships and these settings at these points. And there'll be settings different in different parts of the structure. And they'll have notations saying this is why this worked for this task. And you can take a part of that structure that makes sense for you, build from those different structures. That's another way to accelerate the evolution of the system.
Awesome. Okay, I think it's about time for the next speaker. Let me see if there's any other critical stuff. Briefly, I mentioned Federation briefly. Postgres hopefully will just make it that much easier. Like I can imagine like a server that you've peered with being, in some ways not like permissions-wise, not fundamentally different from a user where they just kind of have this kind of auth token that is that they use to do, post requests to like send data around so that it's visible to people in other pursuances. I mentioned cryptographic auth. We're only using crypto that's been thoroughly audited and or written by a crypto expert. We have no reason for us to roll our own crypto. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah, there's a couple other things, but I think are we okay? Yeah, so HTTPS only, of course. We have Go terminating SSL. One thing that is interesting about that, so like normally, right, you'd have like Nginx in front of everything, and as Miko and I were talking about the other day, it is, you can have Go. Go is efficient enough that you can just have that be the like first piece of software that is touched on the server, like as you have like requests passing through. One advantage of that too is that so Go has really, really good HTTP2 support, and of course like super modern browsers, like the browsers that you'll be able to use with Pursuance, like Firefox and Chrome and Chromium, and Safari Mobile. They support HTTP2 as well, so there's interesting efficiency things we can do where we can just like kind of push like the JavaScript and stuff that the user's about to request, and we know they're about to request it because it's a single page app, and there's like, that's what's about to happen. So like a couple of the other languages that have implemented HTTP2, Go will only let you use HTTP2 over HTTPS. So and so like if Nginx is in front and it's terminating SSL, then Go is like speaking like HTTP to Nginx, in which case Go won't let you use HTTP2. I also think it's kind of interesting that like Nginx, is of course like super popular and would be like a popular target, like kind of security-wise. Like I'm sure the NSA is spending tons of time like finding 0 days in Nginx, as well as other criminal groups. And so if Nginx just isn't there, and it's Go that's in front, and then we can use HTTP2, and then Go itself is proxying stuff to PostgREST behind it, then there could be advantages there, but then you still just have this like plain text between like HTTP traffic between Go and PostgREST that it's forwarding stuff to. So I've heard of some interesting tricks where people have like HTTPS even over like localhost. That's interesting. I suppose that might be doable. But anyway, having like I know someone who does a bunch of offensive security stuff, and he's like, people get lazy. People always terminate it at the load balancer, and then I get like anything behind the load balancer, and like I just see all the traffic that's like in plain HTTP. So avoiding that with Pursuance would be good. And then we're using very secure HTTP headers, so that like even if there was some injection or whatever, code injection or something, that code. That JavaScript would not be able to like talk to other servers and exfiltrate data and stuff like that. So there's the issue, right, of like how do you know that like your server that's running Pursuance, like somebody hasn't like hacked in or something and like modified the code that's running. There's a tool I've been told about recently called OSSec that allows you to kind of periodically check, like periodically hashes like the code that's running on the server, and you make sure that hasn't been tampered with. So that's good. I don't want to log people's IPs for like any significant amount of time at all, and I was thinking of a way to still be able to kind of prevent abuse, where if there's like too many requests coming in from some IP, then we could still leverage that somehow. So I can imagine this thing, and I'm curious what else is exists, what other ideas people have, where I can imagine Go just kind of like generating a new random secret or something like every hour or whatever, and then concatenating that with the user's IP, and then storing like the hash of that. So we'd be able to see like, okay, in this hour, here's how many requests came from like the same IP, and then just in memory, I mean, of course, like of course, Go, if it wants to, can look at the IP of the incoming request. It just wouldn't be logging them. Only if somebody kind of like violated these rules and like sent too many requests, would we like block their IP, and then like the only IP stored of people on disk would be people who were blocked. So something like that I would like to do, but again, I'm curious what the other research is in the area. There's something is it Postgres security functions or security barriers? There's this feature I was reading about where even if you have like kind of, like someone does a post request, it goes through Postgres, goes to Postgres without the T, you do this insert or whatever, and then there's like some database trigger that runs, or like some function that gets called. Apparently there's a way to make it so that you limit the privileges of even the like triggered functions to just the privileges that the user has that did the request. So something I should mention that I don't think I remember to say earlier was when Postgres talks to Postgres, it sort of becomes your database user. So that's why it's safe to expose the the database is how some people see it. But again, there's all these JSON Web Tokens and using the database permissions to make it so that the only stuff you can inject is the only things you can modify are the things that you have permissions to modify. So anyway, but even making it so that like no matter what you trigger, it can't be anything that you don't have permission to, even like very indirectly. I was reading about that. That sounds very interesting. So as far as immediate next steps, making the interface really usable is extremely important. So we're going to kind of slowly, and we're going to be alpha testing extremely soon in the last 3 weeks. Like just 4 people built like not everything right here, but like most of what's here. And so yeah, so testing with users, doing alpha testing, while building out more of the sort of crypto stuff in parallel, which shouldn't affect UI stuff much. It's like between the 16 hours of user interviews I did, and, Barrett's vision and whatnot, it seems like we have a really good hold on what it takes to solve various problems for users and what the key feature set is. And we will steadily add more features over time, as we've been discussing. Yes, I'll get to that. So ideally, right, it's like, I really want people who are using the Tor browser to be able to benefit from Pursuance. Obviously, like things are more secure if you trust the client. Then things are definitely more secure if you download a native app. We're building native apps, like I mentioned, using Electron and React Native, but I still want there to be this web angle, even though like I said, I mentioned OS X, so we'll know if like anything was modified. Accessibility is extremely important, so allowing people to access this from whatever device. There's certain apps that I've chosen not to install on my phone because I don't even want Google to know that I have them installed, and you can't really, it's hard to get around that. So anyway, but in general, it's like it'd be nice if we didn't have to have this this dichotomy between like either you have native apps and you have to force everyone to trust the app enough to install it, and there's all this extra friction in doing that, versus just like sending them a link. And of course, the downside of you send them a link and they look at stuff on the web and oh great, things are encrypted. Well, yeah, they are trusting the JavaScript that comes to them on page load. So that is unfortunate. Unfortunate dichotomy. And what should we do in cases where we are stuck, where we seem to be stuck with 2 choices, both of which are less than optimal?
You want an actual answer, or are you just asking rhetorically?
No, I have an answer right here. But if other people have comments on it, I'm curious. But remember, if you have 2 bad choices, you always choose neither, right? We always choose neither. So there's this very, very, very interesting concept that was introduced to me a couple months ago. It doesn't seem, I think it's just this one person who's figured it out. But there's a guy came from Netherlands, I think. He attended one of my Saturday hackathons. So 4 to 10 p.m. every Saturday at Noisebridge, every Saturday except like yesterday, because we were here. But it's this notion of a transparent web app. So the idea, so there's these things called service workers. So it's almost like a cross between a normal web application and like a browser extension. So you can visit a website, and if that website is like supports service workers, then your browser will see that, and it will sort of install that web application into your browser. So, so what the creator of Airborne OS figured out is if you make it, here's the basic idea is that like you install the service worker, and the first time you install, so service worker is like JavaScript. So you have this like hunk of JavaScript that is like specific to a domain, and then like if the next time you visit the web page, it goes to install like the next version, like the upgraded version of the service worker, he has these checks in here, and again, this is slight oversimplification, I'll explain in a second, but the basic idea is like, you have this thing that you trusted the first time, it does these checks, like it asks the server, hey, give me the next version of the service worker, and then the old service worker, the one that you're trusting, does the hash, it calculates the hash of the new service worker it just got, and then it does a call to GitHub, and if like the hash of the new version of the service worker is in this GitHub repo that it was initially told it should look for to find the like new versions of itself, then it knows, oh look, the attacker would have had to change what's on the server that I was just served and control what's on GitHub, and that's a lot harder to do. So so that's the ideal. The way that it actually works is a little bit different from that, where you can't have your code. There's no way for your code to inspect the JavaScript that is the service worker that was just installed. It's like your browser automatically like puts in the new service worker, and then you can do a request and then say, oh, give me the new service worker. But the server could serve two different pieces of JavaScript in those two cases. So it's, but anyway, in general, I think it's a very, very clever attempt to kind of, have our cake and eat it too, right? You want the kind of linkability and the, you don't have to install a bunch of stuff. You don't have to trust an app fully that you're like, by installing it natively. That's an advantage that the web has, but making it so that you're not just like trusting random, whatever JavaScript happens to be served. So anyway, transparent web applications is the name that this guy gave it, named after, like binary transparency is a similar concept. So last I checked, he was trying to get like Google or Firefox or Google and Mozilla to make this tweak so that your JavaScript running can inspect like the installed service worker and make sure that is like the version that that is like what's on GitHub, and therefore you can trust it. So I went to the Airborne OS website like a couple months ago, and then I went back today, and here's a message I got. It says Airborne OS is updated, so like there's a new service worker installed, and then it gave me all these links to GitHub, so I can like verify that like do I actually want this new version. This guy also pointed out that one thing that's nice about it's not just, okay, the attacker has to control your GitHub and control your web server, and okay, that's like two things they have to attack instead of just one. He pointed out that like GitHub is public, right? So the idea that like someone could potentially like spot the malicious thing being done because it needs to be in this like public GitHub repo. So next steps for us. If people would like to demo Pursuance, that would be awesome. Like I mentioned earlier, getting the interface right, making it as user-friendly as possible is extremely important. So you can go to pursuanceproject.org/ASD, ASD for Aaron Swartz Day, and or you can talk to me or talk to the Pursuance crew here, Annalise, AJ, and Marty. But yeah, Pursuance Project. You can join the mailing list, pursuanceproject.org. Barrett, any final comments you want to make before we head out?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate I think.
Oh. Hang on just a second. I don't know if you can hear me, but somebody disconnected. I bet you it was Barrett. I will try refreshing. All right, we'll see if Barrett reconnects in a second. I don't know. Any final questions that people want to ask, either of me or of Barrett, or of the Pursuance gods, one per Pursuance? Is he reconnecting? BB connected. All right, Barrett, you cut out, but all right. What are your final thoughts about regarding Pursuance, Aaron Swartz Day? This is our final talk. You have the floor.
Yeah, let me just repeat the broad metaphor for what this is that we gave yesterday, so that people can understand kind of the emphasis here. If you think of the state and its institutions as a building, the Pursuance system is scaffolding around that building. Like scaffolding, it can be used in many different ways. It can be used for repairs. It can be used to take out parts of the building. And it can be affixed with nets so that when the building collapses, the bricks won't fall on people. This is something that can be used for everything from, mainstream moderate people who are just trying to better pursue their civics, NGOs, nonprofits, revolutionaries abroad in places like Tunisia, years ago, who were being arrested by the police because they were using Facebook. So we want to make sure that everyone who wants to has the opportunity to affect their civics at a time when that's more needed than ever. And we want to make sure that everyone who hasn't thought about it can see what can now be done so that they can get the opportunity that they don't think they have. Right now, it's very hard for many people to see how they can get involved in fundamental change around the globe. And as we proceed with this, I think we're going to make that window a little bit wider for a lot of people. Thanks everybody for coming, and we hope to have you sign up at pursuanceproject.org.
Perfect. Thank you, Barrett. So yeah, if there's anybody watching either in person or online, if you want to help us revolutionize activism, if you want to work on very ambitious things that are from, we have a very sharp crowd. There's thousands of very smart people that Barrett Brown attracts, and if you want to help us with Pursuance, go to pursuanceproject.org or talk to me. Thank you.